In the heart of the vast and ancient whispering woods, where the trees stood as tall as giants and the streams sang silver songs, lay the territory of the Moonstone Pack. It was the strongest, most respected pack in all the land, and for generations, it had been ruled by a line of powerful alpha kings. But the king who ruled now was unlike any who had come before. His name was Rafe, and he was a mega-size alpha. This meant he was not just strong, he was a giant among his kind. When he walked, the very ground seemed to tremble with respect. When he shifted into his wolf form, he was a magnificent, terrifying beast of midnight black fur and eyes that glowed like molten gold, towering over the largest of his warriors. He was the pack's greatest protector, a living fortress of muscle and might. Yet, within the walls of his own grand, lonely house, he was also the most solitary soul for miles around. You see, a deep and old law of the Moonstone Pack stated that an alpha king must have a mate. A mate was more than just a wife, she was a partner, a best friend, the other half of a leader's soul who would help him rule with both strength and kindness. A king without a mate was seen as incomplete, and a pack without a queen was like a sky without a moon, directionless and dark. But for Rafe, finding a mate had become an impossible dream. His immense size and the raw, overwhelming power that radiated from him like heat from a forge scared everyone. The sheer force of his presence made the air feel thick and heavy. Women would lower their gazes and quickly step aside when he passed, their hearts pounding not with excitement, but with pure, cold fear. No one dared to even dream of being the mate of the mega-size Alpha King. One crisp evening, as the sky began to blush with the colors of sunset, the pack's elders came to see Rafe. They were old, wise wolves with graying fur and serious faces. "King Rafe," the eldest began, his voice rough like grinding stones. "The time can no longer be ignored. The next full moon rises in 3 days' time. At the ceremony, you must stand before the entire pack and ask for a mate one final time. This is our most sacred tradition." The elder paused, his eyes full of a sad sympathy. If no one steps forward to accept you, the law is clear. You will have to leave the Moonstone Pack to wander alone, so that a new alpha, one who can find a mate, may rise to lead us. Rafe's golden eyes darkened with a pain he kept locked deep inside. Leave his home? Abandon the pack he had protected since he was a young boy? The very thought was a physical ache in his chest, sharper than any claw or tooth. But he was a king and he would obey the law even if it broke his heart. He simply nodded, a slow, heavy dip of his head, and the elders left him alone in his silent hall, the weight of his fate pressing down on his broad shoulders like a mountain. While the king suffered in his solitude, life in the rest of the pack went on. In the bustling kitchens, surrounded by the warm smells of baking bread and simmering stews, a young Omega woman named Selene worked from dawn until dusk. Omegas were the lowest rank in the pack, the helpers and the caretakers. Selene was often asked to do the hardest jobs, scrubbing the great pots, sweeping the dusty floors and gathering the sweetest berries from the thorniest bushes. She was quiet and gentle, with kind, watchful eyes the color of a soft gray sky. She didn't have the strength of a warrior or the commanding voice of a leader, but she possessed a different kind of magic. When Selene sang, her voice was as clear and calming as a quiet river. Frightened pups would fall asleep to her lullabies, and even agitated animals would grow still and peaceful, soothed by her melodies. The other pack members were often too busy to notice her, but Selene noticed everything, especially the lonely shadow in the king's eyes whenever he passed by. The night of the full moon arrived, a perfect, shimmering silver coin against a velvet black sky. The entire Moonstone Pack gathered in the wide, grassy clearing at the center of their territory. A nervous excitement hummed in the air. Torches flickered, casting dancing shadows on the faces of the crowd. Warriors, mothers, hunters, and elders, they were all there. The air crackled with anticipation and a thick layer of unspoken fear. Then Rafe emerged from the trees. He walked to the center of the clearing, a massive, solitary figure under the brilliant moonlight. He did not need to raise his voice for silence to fall instantly. Every wolf, from the smallest child to the fiercest elder, held their breath. He looked out at the sea of faces, at all the women who refused to meet his gaze. His heart felt like a stone in his chest. Taking a deep breath that expanded his giant frame, he spoke, his voice a low, rumbling thunder that vibrated in everyone's bones. "Pack of Moonstone," he began, the words feeling heavy on his tongue. "The law of our ancestors calls for an alpha to have a mate. I stand before you now to ask, will any woman here accept me as her mate?" The silence that followed was deafening. It was a living, painful thing. The only sound was the crackle of the torches and the whisper of the wind in the trees. One by one, every woman in the crowd lowered her head, studying the ground, their hands, anything but the powerful, lonely king standing before them. The fear was too great. The idea of being close to such an immense, powerful creature was unthinkable. Seconds stretched into a minute, and the hope in Rafe's eyes, a hope he had secretly guarded, finally flickered and died. A deep, weary sadness settled over his features. He had his answer. He gave a slow, accepting nod, his shoulders slumping just a little as he started to turn away, ready to accept his lonely fate. But just as he took his first step to leave the clearing forever, a small, clear voice cut through the heavy silence. It was not loud, but in the quiet, it rang out as clear as a bell. "I will." A gasp rippled through the crowd. People shuffled and stepped aside, creating a path, their eyes wide with disbelief. And there, at the very back of the gathering, stood Selene. Her hands were clasped tightly in front of her simple dress to stop them from shaking, and her heart was beating so fast she felt sure everyone could hear it. But her chin was held high, and her gray eyes were fixed not on the ground, but directly on the stunned face of the mega-size Alpha King. She took one small hesitant step forward, and then another, walking the long path through the parted crowd until she stood just a few feet away from him. She looked so small and fragile before his gigantic form, like a single wildflower growing at the foot of a mighty mountain. Rafe stared down at her, his golden eyes wide with shock and confusion. Of all the wolves in his pack, the only one with the courage to answer his call was the gentle, quiet Omega girl he had barely noticed. And in that moment, under the watchful eye of the full moon, everything changed. The days that followed the full moon ceremony were filled with a strange, new silence in the Alpha King's house. It was a different kind of quiet than the lonely emptiness Rafe was used to. This was a silence woven from uncertainty and the delicate threads of two lives being placed together without any idea of how they should fit. Selene's few belongings, a small chest of simple dresses and a dried flower she kept for its scent, seemed almost lost in the vast stone-walled room she was given, a room far grander than the small Omega quarters she had always known. For his part, Rafe did not know what to do with her. He was a king, a warrior, accustomed to giving orders that were instantly obeyed, not to making conversation or putting a gentle Omega at ease. He believed her offer was born from a moment of foolish bravery or, worse, pity, and he expected her to look at him with fear in her eyes now that they were alone. So, he kept his distance, speaking only when necessary, his deep voice a low rumble in the hallways, his massive frame always carefully angled away from her as if to make himself seem smaller, less threatening. Selene, however, was not afraid. She was nervous, certainly, her heart fluttering like a trapped bird whenever he entered the room, but it was not the cold grip of terror she saw in others. She saw the way he moved, with a careful, almost painful precision, as if he were constantly afraid of breaking something. She noticed how he would often stand at the large window in the main hall, staring out at the pack with a look of such profound loneliness that it made her own heart ache. So, she decided to do what she did best. She began to care for him in the only way she knew how. She did not wait for the pack cooks to send food. Instead, she rose early and used his large, mostly empty kitchen, filling it with the warm, comforting smells of honey cakes and spiced meat pies, food she had learned to make for the pack celebrations. She would leave them on the great wooden table with a simple, "I thought you might be hungry, my king," before quietly slipping away. At first, Rafe was suspicious. He would eye the food, his pride warring with the simple human pleasure of a home-cooked meal. But eventually, hunger won out, and he found the flavors were warm and familiar, tasting more of pack and home than any elaborate meal prepared by the official cooks. Slowly, he began to linger in the room when she was there. He started with simple, gruff questions. "Did you sleep well?" he might ask, his gaze fixed on the far wall. Or, "The food is acceptable." It was the closest he could manage to a thank you. Selene would simply smile, a soft, genuine curve of her lips, and answer him honestly, her voice never trembling. She started asking him questions in return, not about being alpha but about himself. "What is your favorite season, my king?" Or, "Do you enjoy the silence of the snow?" No one had asked him such simple things in years. And she sang. It was never a performance. She would hum while she swept the hearth, or sing a soft, wordless melody as she arranged winter berries in a bowl on the table. Rafe began to notice a strange phenomenon. The constant, simmering energy that always coursed through him, the raw power that made his muscles feel tight and his temper feel close to the surface, seemed to soften and quiet when her voice filled the air. It was like a gentle, cool hand soothing a fevered brow. For the first time in his adult life, he felt a sense of peace settle deep in his bones when she was near. This fragile, growing understanding was put to the test on a night when a violent storm raged outside, the wind howling like 1,000 lost wolves. Rafe was plagued by a nightmare, a dark vision of his own power destroying the pack he loved. In his sleep, the nightmare took hold of him. A low growl rumbled in his chest, and then, with a terrifying tear of fabric, he partially shifted. His body swelled, dark fur erupting, claws tearing the bedsheets, his form becoming a monstrous, half-wolf, half-man creature trapped in the throes of his dream. The wooden bedpost splintered under his grip, and a roar of confusion and anger tore from his throat, echoing through the quiet house. Selene, jolted from her sleep by the sound, did not hesitate. She rushed from her room, her thin nightdress fluttering around her, and pushed open the door to his chamber. The scene was one of pure chaos and terror. The room was wrecked, and in the center of it stood Rafe, a giant, snarling beast, his golden eyes wild with the remnants of his dream, completely lost to his animal instincts. Any sane person would have fled. But Selene saw past the fur and the fangs. She saw the fear in his eyes, the same loneliness she had always seen. She did not run. Instead, she took a slow, careful step into the room. "Rafe," she whispered, her voice steady despite the thunder of her heart. He snarled, swiping a clawed hand through the air, a clear warning to stay back. She took another step. "It's me," she said softly. "It's Selene. You're safe. The pack is safe." He took a lurching step toward her, his hot breath stirring her hair. This was the moment of truth. Closing her eyes for a brief second, she began to sing. It was the same soft, wordless lullaby she used for the frightened pups, a melody as ancient and calm as the moon itself. She poured all her gentle courage into the song, her voice a steady, clear stream against the storm of his rage. She slowly reached out a hand not to touch him, but as an offering. The giant wolfman hesitated. The snarling softened to a low, confused rumble. The wild fire in his eyes began to dim. He took a slow, shuddering breath and then another, his massive body trembling with the effort to regain control. Slowly, ever so slowly, he lowered his great head and rested his heavy, furred brow in the palm of her outstretched hand. His breathing evened out, the tension draining from his muscles as he knelt before her, finally calm, finally still. The next morning, the silence in the house was different once again. It was a soft, understanding quiet. Rafe found Selene in the kitchen, her hands dusted with flour. He stood in the doorway looking not like a terrifying king, but like a man who had been truly seen for the first time. "Selene," he said, her name feeling new and important on his tongue. "What happened last night? No one has ever." "Thank you." The words were difficult, but he meant them with every fiber of his being. He told her then, his voice low and raw, about the constant burden of his size and power, the isolation that had been his companion since he was a boy deemed too different. Selene listened, her gray eyes soft and unwavering. When he finished, she placed her small, flowery hand over his large, scarred one. "I did not step forward because I felt sorry for you, Rafe," she said, her voice firm and clear. "I did it because every time I saw you, I saw a good man carrying a weight that was too heavy for one person alone. I saw a heart that deserved to be understood." In that moment, standing in the sunlit kitchen, the space between them vanished. He looked at her, truly looked at her, not as an omega or a solution to a problem, but as Selene, the brave, kind woman who had walked into his storm and quieted it with a song. And she looked at him, not as a mega-size alpha, but as Rafe, the lonely man who was slowly letting her see the kindness behind his golden eyes. A new, unbreakable bond, forged in trust and understanding, settled warmly around them both. The newfound understanding between Rafe and Selene was like the first warm sunrise after a long, harsh winter. It thawed the icy silence in the alpha's house, filling the grand, stone rooms with a gentle warmth that had been absent for years. Rafe no longer kept his distance. He began to seek Selene out, not with royal commands, but with a quiet, almost shy curiosity. He showed her his favorite view of the forest from a high balcony, the words coming more easily to him as he pointed out the ancient trees he had climbed as a pup. He listened, truly listened, as she spoke of her life in the kitchens, of the simple joys of finding the first berries of summer or the way the pack pups would giggle when she sang them to sleep. He found himself laughing, a deep, genuine sound that surprised them both, at a funny story she told about a mischievous squirrel that always stole from the grain stores. For the first time, Rafe's immense size felt less like a barrier and more like a shield he could use to protect this precious, growing connection. He would stand close to her, not to intimidate, but simply to feel the calm that radiated from her, a calm that soothed the constant roaring power within him. But not everyone in the Moonstone Pack viewed this budding romance with gentle eyes. Among the warriors was a woman named Briar. She was strong, fast, and her fur was the color of dried blood. For years, she had secretly believed herself to be the only one worthy of standing beside a king of Rafe's power. She had hoped that his need for a mate would eventually force him to look past his loneliness and see her strength. The sight of the mighty Alpha King walking peacefully with the tiny Omega, his head bent low to hear her soft words, filled Briar not with happiness for her king, but with a bitter, burning jealousy. She saw Selene's kindness as weakness and her calming presence as a trick. To Briar, an Omega had no right to be queen. This jealousy finally boiled over during a pack gathering in the main clearing. Briar stepped into the center of the circle, her eyes flashing with a hard light. She pointed a sharp finger directly at Selene, who was standing quietly beside Rafe. "This is a farce." Briar's voice cut through the friendly chatter, silencing it instantly. "Our king deserves a mate of strength, a warrior who can fight at his side. Not a weak little Omega who hides in kitchens and sings songs. She is not fit to be our queen." The pack fell into a tense, uncomfortable silence. All eyes turned to Selene, waiting for her to cower or cry. Briar lifted her chin in challenge. "I challenge you, Selene. A fight for the right to be the Alpha's true mate." A ripple of shock went through the crowd. It was a brutal, ancient law rarely invoked. Before Selene could even draw a stunned breath, Rafe moved. He did not simply step forward. He seemed to grow, his presence expanding to fill the entire clearing, his golden eyes burning with a protective fire so intense it made the air crackle. He placed his massive body squarely between Briar and Selene, a living, breathing wall of absolute authority. His voice, when he spoke, was not a roar but something far more powerful, a deep, resonant declaration that carried the full weight of his kingship. "Enough." The single word echoed with finality. He looked not at Briar but at his entire pack, his gaze sweeping over every single face. "You all look at me and see only this," he said, gesturing to his own immense body. "You see size. You see power. You see a weapon. For my entire life, that is all anyone has seen." Then he turned his head, and his gaze fell upon Selene, and the ferocity in his eyes melted into a look of such profound tenderness that the entire pack seemed to hold its breath. "But she," he said, his voice softening, "she was the only one who looked at me and saw a person. She saw the loneliness. She saw the heart. She had the courage to walk toward me when every single one of you, out of fear, stepped back." He turned his blazing eyes back to Briar. "You speak of strength? True strength is not measured in muscle or claw. It is measured in the courage of the heart. It is the strength to offer kindness instead of fear. It is the strength to calm a storm instead of starting one. Selene possesses more true strength than any warrior here, and I would be the poorest of kings if I did not recognize the greatest treasure my pack has to offer." He then turned fully to Selene, taking her small hands in his own. He spoke to her and for her, but his voice carried for all to hear. "Selene, you are my equal in every way that truly matters. You are my calm, my courage, and my heart. Will you do me the greatest honor and become my true bonded mate, my partner, and my queen?" Tears of happiness welled in Selene's gray eyes, sparkling like morning dew. There was no hesitation. "Yes, Rafe," she whispered, her voice clear and sure. "I will." As the word left her lips, something magical happened. A soft, silver light began to glow from where their hands were joined. It enveloped them both, swirling around Rafe's massive form and Selene's gentle one in a beautiful, shimmering dance. It was the mate bond, the ancient magic of their kind, sealing their souls together forever. The pack watched in awed silence as the light pulsed warmly, feeling not like a display of fearsome power, but like a wave of pure, unconditional love washing over them all. In that moment, every doubt, every whisper, every bit of Briar's jealousy was erased, replaced by a simple, undeniable truth. Their king had found his queen and their love made their pack whole. The celebration that followed was the most joyful the Moonstone Pack had ever seen. There was feasting and dancing and laughter that echoed through the whispering woods. Rafe, with Selene by his side, was a changed king, still powerful, still respected, but now also approachable and just, his decisions guided by her wise and compassionate counsel. Selene, loved and cherished by all, used her gentle power to heal old rivalries and soothe troubled hearts, her songs now a regular, beloved sound throughout the territory. They ruled side by side, a perfect balance of strength and gentleness, of power and peace, proving to everyone that the bravest heart could indeed be found in the most unexpected person, and that true love was the greatest magic of all. If you were swept away by the love story of Rafe and Selene, and you want to journey with us into more magical worlds where courage meets kindness and love conquers all, make sure to subscribe. New chapters of romance and adventure are always on the horizon, waiting just for you.